Janet and John go to college. Today, Janet and John are going to the college. Janet is going to her first aid lessons. John is going to the library. John sometimes gets books with pictures from Melanie Frontage's special shop with black windows. Do you know what shed inhibitions are? When Janet and John arrive at the college, Janet says, "I'll only be an hour, so see if you can stay out of mischief for a change." "Yes, I will," says John. When John has finished going round and round in the revolving door, he's quite dizzy, so he has to sit down. Mrs. McIntosh, the librarian, standing on a small ladder, oh no, taking down the plastic letters from the notice board behind the desk in reception. John said,
"Can I help you with anything, Mrs. McIntosh?"
Kind John. And Mrs. McIntosh says, "I'm just taking down the details of the foundation courses for the last term. Would you like to help me sort out and clean these plastic letters?"
"Yes, please," says John. "But I'll have to roll up my sleeves, as these lace cuffs will get spoiled if they get dirty."
How dare you?
John sees Mrs. Bickerdike. "Hey up, fluffy whiskers," says Mrs. Bickerdike. Mrs. Bickerdike is from Yorkshire. See the ferrets. Mrs. Bickerdike is helping, and so is her friend, Mrs. Gregory. Mrs. McIntosh says, "Put the different letters in these plastic cups so they don't get all mixed up." And once the letters have been sorted, Mrs. McIntosh says, "Now, we need to give them a quick wash and some soapy water to get them all clean and bright again. Pop into the kitchen with the ladies, and it'll be done in no time." John, Mrs. Gregory, and Mrs. Bickerdike quickly wash and dry the letters in the kitchen, sort them out afterwards. What fun! Some of the cups have so many letters they're overflowing. See John write his name with the plastic letters. Clever John. Soon all the letters have been washed and dried, ready to be put back on the notice board. John sees Janet coming out of her class and skips over to meet her outside.
"I do not skip."
"Hello, Janet,"
says John, skipping the while. And Janet says, "You look pleased with yourself. What have you been up to?" See the warning signs. And John says, "When I got here, I saw Mrs. McIntosh up a ladder. She asked me to help her take down last term's foundations, as they were due for a wash. Then I saw Mrs. Gregory and Mrs. Bickerdike, and Mrs. McIntosh said we could all have some fun with the soapy water in the kitchen. The washing took a long time. Mrs. McIntosh had only 34 C's, which didn't take long, but Mrs. Gregory's took ages. You should have seen the size of her F and G cups. Mrs. Bickerdike's was so full there was a couple of handfuls left over. It took me ages to rinse all the soap off them." Do you know what a tourniquet is? See Janet make a tourniquet out of John's tie. Paint John's face purple. Poor John.